There we go. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fifth session of our 8-part virtual series, Know Better, Do Better, Transforming Literacy Practices. At the bottom of the screen, and I did pop it in the chat, but some people coming in might not have seen it yet, is the bit.ly link. This is case sensitive, so just make sure that you have your capitals where it is. And KBDB for Know Better, Do Better vocab. So welcome, and let's jump in and get to it. All right. So my name is Amy Healy, and I am the Training and Consultation Supervisor at the Capital Area Intermediate Unit. And with me is Dr. Sarah Loball, who is the MTSS and Literacy Consultant at the CAIU. I'll say hi, Sarah.
Hello.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited to have you here today. As we have with all of our past sessions, we're going to follow the same agenda for our 30 minutes together. We're going to talk about a common practice, what the problems are, some research, and then what we could do instead, and share some resources. So again, the bit.ly link is on there. If you do miss it, we will show it again at the very end. So you can grab it then before you leave. Today's topic is vocabulary. And specifically, we're going to talk about the usage of vocabulary activities and vocabulary packets. A lot of great things out there with vocabulary, so many wonderful things we can do. And then there's some things that we see in classrooms often that we could kind of maybe replace with some other things. So vocabulary packets and some these other activities we're going to talk about here in a second are some of those. So what is a vocabulary packet? If you're not familiar, and these have really in the past few years have gained a lot of traction. We're seeing these more and more, which is becoming a little bit more concerning on how they're being used in classrooms. So a vocabulary packet, again, very common. It's just a packet of activities, several pages typically, and each page has some different activities for students to do around a set of words. So for example, there might be some matching, match words and definitions. There might be ones that fill in the blank with the vocab word. Some that require some drawing or coloring. Often they have like a passage then, and you might go find the word in the passage, answer some passage questions, and even use the word in a sentence, or take two vocabulary words. I see that one, take two vocabulary words and use it in one sentence. All aren't necessarily bad activities, but they're often, here's a set of words that are completely in isolation of the rest of the work that you're doing throughout the day. So they might not be related to the literature or content areas or other focus. So here's a set of words and several activity pages around those set of words. And these can often be downloaded from some teacher websites that produce them. So again, completely in isolation of the rest of the day. Some other activities that we see that we want to add in here is good old dictionary skills, right? Specifically, here's your list of words. Let's go look them up in the dictionary. We've known that one for a long time, as we want to try to get away from that, and yet we still see that quite often. The one in the middle there, write your vocabulary words in a sentence. So often it might be look up the word in the dictionary, now you go write it in a sentence, or here's our list of words we're working on, here's what the word means, you go use it in a sentence. And then the last one's just, here's a list of vocabulary words. We're going to pull off all of these vocabulary words that might be ones that a fifth grader should know. And then we might do some things around those words. So let's talk about the purpose. Why are we doing these activities? And really the purpose for doing all these things that we're talking about is good. It's to build vocabulary, right? We want to build a student's vocabulary. We know how important vocabulary is. We know that vocabulary um, facilitates comprehension. We know that vocabulary is a predictor of future reading success. Even starting in kindergarten, we know that a kindergartner's vocabulary can predict second grade success. So it's important, right? So doing these things has good intentions behind it. Another intended purpose is being able to then to apply that vocabulary into other contexts. So all of those activities in the packet are then, hey, we can use these in different ways, and that way we know how they've learned the vocabulary. And then finally, we know how important background knowledge is, right? And vocabulary and background knowledge go hand in hand. So by focusing on vocabulary, we're building a student's content-specific knowledge, which is going to help to facilitate comprehension. So all of these are really good intended purposes. The problem with these, though, so we're going to break some of these down here, is the first one especially. These activities are teaching words completely in isolation. So as I mentioned with those packets, here's a set of words that has nothing to do with any of the literature students are working through during the day, isn't part of their maybe read alouds, or isn't part of their science or social studies or anything. It's just a completely different set of words that they're working with. And sometimes with those packets, there's no teaching that's even going alongside of it. So sometimes students will get a packet at the beginning of the week. Hey, here's your words and some activities. And by the end of the week, we want you to hand that packet in. So essentially it becomes some sort of busy work or a homework grade or something like that for students. We know that in order to affect comprehension, the instruction has to go beyond just what's the word and the definition. And Sarah's going to get into some of that research in a little bit. The last thing there is that when you ask students to now take your vocabulary that you just learned and write it in a sentence, students have a lot of difficulty doing that. And if you've ever had to do that and take them from, here's the word, apply it, their sentences aren't the best when they're done writing them, because they really have difficulty taking this brand new word and applying it, and especially when it's completely out of the context of the other work that they're doing. Some other problems, and these are more around the dictionary aspect, is first of all, our vocabularies, our receptive vocabularies and expressive vocabularies, they don't grow just by simply memorizing dictionary definitions. So this really doesn't aid our growing of our vocabulary. Dictionary definitions themselves are designed to save space. There's a lot of words that have to fit in that book. And so they are very abbreviated and often do not give the clearest explanation. So a student might read the word and the definition and still not have a really good understanding. And then also, they often use synonyms. And so there's words in those definitions that are vocabulary words themselves. The final bullet point on there is then the dictionary definitions don't really support students in how to use those words. And words can be used in many ways. We have the academic use, we have social use, and the definitions in the dictionaries aren't going to support that. So lots of problems that exist. We can probably keep talking about these for a while, but we're going to now jump into the research.
All right, so there is a ton of research on vocabulary instruction, and it's one of my favorite areas. So I'm going to try to just give you the highlights. So vocabulary is highly correlated with reading comprehension. There have been a lot of research studies done through fMRIs that show that words and words that are related to certain topics are stored in different areas of the brain. And so this little brain picture here links to an interactive brain that kind of shows these areas, and you can explore that a little later. So this shows that the learning of a word or a concept occurs in layers over time. So stronger readers are often more likely to read widely, which gives them access to more context and connections between meanings of words and adding on those different layers of words. So for our struggling students who aren't reading as much, they aren't building as many connections or associations between those words, and that can sometimes hinder the growth of their vocabulary and possibly even their comprehension. So it's really important, even for readers who are struggling readers, to find something that will help to get them into the vocabulary loop so that they're starting to see those words and make connections. The first meanings that students get are easier to retrieve. Secondary meanings that students learn are sometimes more difficult to retrieve. So the instruction that we provide as a foundation is really important in that word storage and retrieval. So if a student learns a word incorrectly, it's going to be even harder to retrieve or change their understanding later. So there are some evidence-based practices that we can use instead of packets or looking up words in the dictionary or things like that, that can really help students retain and use vocabulary more effectively. So I'm going to jump here to the bottom first, because fostering a word-conscious classroom is definitely a really important part. Providing exposure to words and wordplay and those kinds of pieces are really effective. But incidental vocabulary isn't quite enough for students. So there are some research-based practices that evidence says that the words that we choose for instruction matter. So instead of choosing all of the words on a list for vocabulary, we can pre-assess students to determine if they already know the word and focus on the words that maybe they aren't as familiar with. We can choose words that are really essential to understanding a concept, or even some what we call academic vocabulary that students can use across a wide variety of contexts. Words that have roots or affixes are also good words to choose because they can lead students to even more words. So ideally, evidence shows that typically 6 to 10 words taught across the course of a week is appropriate for elementary students. At the secondary level, it's about 10 to 11 words a week that students can really retain being taught across a week. So it's really important to choose the words we teach wisely. Also, another important aspect of vocabulary instruction is that explicit teaching is really beneficial, and we'll see what that looks like in a minute. William Van Cleve also asserts that there's an importance of providing opportunities for students to practice with the words that they're taught explicitly and do some wordplay in the form of like sentence stems or graphic organizers or word continuums or similes. And this step often gets missed. We sometimes teach the words and then expect students to know them right away. But we miss that step of having them really do some activities and practice with the words. These can be just real brief practice activities that can be done in the hall while we're reading for a special class or while lining up too. But it's important for them to get that practice with the words. There's also some evidence on asking students to retrieve word knowledge or use some informal assessment options, and we'll talk about that a little bit coming up. And then finally, there's a lot of research on the importance of teaching morphology for vocabulary knowledge. And this can even start in first grade or kindergarten when we talk about adding S to the end of a word to show that it's more than one, because S is a morpheme when we add it to a word to make it more than one. So morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning, and S can hold meaning when it's marking a plural. So 1 in 3 words that we see for the first time is actually linked morphologically to something we already know, but it doesn't necessarily mean we know the word itself. So unlocking some of those morphemes for students is really valuable. All right, so what does this look like in instruction? So first, for new vocabulary that we want students to know well, we want to teach it using an explicit routine. There are some vocabulary cards that are linked on the screen that's going to be coming up with some of the resources, and that will give you the routine that I'm kind of showing you here. So first, we would say, all right, everyone, the word is elevate. Everybody, what's the word? Elevate, elevate, elevate. What's the word? Elevate. When we elevate something, we make it higher. So we provide a student-friendly definition and we make sure they know how to pronounce the word. Then I give some examples. When I get a stool out to reach my top cabinet, I am elevating myself. I'm making myself higher. I had to elevate my leg after I injured it. So I had to make it higher. If I pick this book up off the floor and put it on a shelf, am I elevating the book? Yes or no, everyone? And they would say yes. So we ask them some questions and give them some examples and give them some opportunities to use the word. Okay, then we can also consider some different retrieval practice activities that we can use after we teach words explicitly to help students practice those words. So here are some examples on this screen. So sentence stems would be using the word in a sentence that the students would need to finish. So I elevated my Halloween candy because they may say because I have a dog and I didn't want the dog to eat it, or I have a baby sister and I didn't want the baby sister to eat it, or something like that. Word relationships uses 2 vocabulary words in the same sentence for students. So can I elevate something that is stationary? Why or why not? Visual synectics is where they associate pictures with a learned vocabulary word. And they explain why they chose that picture to illustrate the word. Word lines. So would you elevate a computer? Would you elevate a bulldozer? Would you elevate your dinner? Just some, silly things to kind of have students talk about and kind of learn those words more deeply. Also, meaningful sentence writing. So not just writing it when we haven't had a lot of instruction, but I might use the word and then students have to plug in some other words. So who elevated what, when, where, why, or how. So that might be a little bit more advanced, but that's a way to help guide them into some better sentences and also practice some sentence structure as well. Okay, and then that final step is asking students to be able to retrieve the word or sometimes assessment of the word. So one of the things we want to consider when we're asking students to retrieve words or we're assessing students on words is what level of knowledge you expect those vocabulary words to have. What's the goal? Do they just need to have an initial understanding of the word? Or do they need to have a deep understanding of the word for comprehension or composition or further work? And so those 2 questions can really guide what kind of assessment you need to do on your vocabulary words. Because assessment is not closing the door on learning words, because we know from our research at the beginning that words have multiple meanings and layers of associations with them. And so students are really going to need continued interactions with words throughout that year and beyond. So we may not actually ever see students arrive at the full understanding of the word before they leave our classroom, because there's so many associations that build on top of it. However, here are some different things if you are assessing words that you can use. So the traditional multiple choice test, true or false. So asking students to distinguish between an example or a non-example of the word. Using word pairs and having students determine how they're different or the same. Sentence stems, just like in our retrieval practice or in our practicing the word section, we can have them do those as an assessment as well. If you teach in kindergarten or first grade or younger students, you can create oral statements that they can respond with yes or no, or they can have a smile or a frown that they can hold up, as well as just a quick informal assessment of their understanding of those words. And then also our morphology practice. So morphological knowledge builds word sense, it builds literacy skills like vocabulary and comprehension, builds content knowledge, builds multiple meanings of words. So over here on the left, I have linked a lesson plan protocol for teaching morphemes at the elementary level. These are also a great exercise once you teach a root or a morpheme. These word matrices can help students not just learn the word like teach, but also create words like reteach and what that means, and pre-teach and what that means, and teacher and teaches and teaching and teachable and unteachable and reteachable. And so they can actually just from that one root or one word matrix get several other words from that as well. All right, so here are a few resources that you can take with you to use in your classroom to support vocabulary instruction. So first of all, here we have the Florida Center for Reading Research, which we keep on there because they really have tons of activities for all aspects of literacy, and they do have some vocabulary activities that you can check out as well. These are vocabulary routine cards, which are great. When you download these cards, you can choose to put them on a ring or cardstock. And here you'll see there's that instructional routine for teaching vocabulary explicitly that I kind of briefly modeled before, introducing the word, providing the student-friendly definition, illustrating the word with examples, and then checking for their understanding. And there's also some great routines here for teaching vocabulary in a read aloud, for fostering word consciousness, for deep processing, for review, some assessment options as well. So those are in there and they're a great resource. We also linked the book Morphology Matters over here by Deb Glazer. I know some of you have been exploring that resource, but it is a great resource for grades about 3 to 12, 4 to 12, and it provides a really nice brief lesson on the most common morphemes, and then provides some options for them to practice throughout the week. So that's also a great resource that you can purchase. I'm going to jump down here to explicit instruction because Anita Archer is one of my favorite people. And on her website, explicitinstruction.org, if you go to video elementary or video secondary, you can watch a video of Anita Archer. Here's vocabulary instruction second grade and kindergarten. I love the second grade one. You can watch that video and see that explicit instruction routine in action. And then also we have Membean, and Membean is a neat website that you can use. It has a neat, they call them rootcasts, and they're kind of like little podcast type things that talk about a root or a prefix or some kind of affix every day. They talk about a different one. So there's lots of great resources on there as well. And then finally, well, not finally, I guess, but Word Generation is the final link down here. That is a free resource from the SERP Institute. And some of you may have used Word Generation or know of it for middle school, but it also exists for grades 4 and 5. And it focuses more on developing academic vocabulary across different contexts and content areas. And then we also have over here the Reading Comprehension Blueprint, which some of you may have in your school buildings that you can access. If not, this is a really great book that has a whole chapter on developing vocabulary and some different practices, some that we talked about today and some that are that we didn't get to talk about today, but are really wonderful as well. And then finally here we have for 95% group vocabulary surge. This is another way to help teach students morphemes and roots as well in a more explicit way. All right, so tons of resources there. We're happy to support you in using any of those resources or telling you more about them if you're curious about how to use those in your classroom. All right, so our next topic for our next session, which I think is next Friday, is word walls. So we're going to be kind of digging into word walls and what's the deal with those. So, but as always, we thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will take some of these resources and try them out, use them in your classroom. Please don't hesitate to ask us questions or let us know if you need any additional information. And we'll end with do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Maya Angelou's quote. So, and again, if you came in a little late, the link is down here on the bottom of the screen. And I'm going to put it in the chat again for anybody who needs it. So thank you again. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. And we'll hopefully look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, everyone.